Oh, it is just great to see you back so soon. I'm excited to talk more about
Value.
in this episode, which I'm titling Part 2. I know you've all been wondering why value is so important. Well, it is value that allows us to see depth, shape, texture, and space. Let's take a look at this beautiful value study of a pearl. I like to think of myself as Paul Kenneth's pearl. As light rays hit an object, they are reflected and or absorbed by the surface of the object. The rays that are reflected off the object into our eyes are perceived as lighter or higher values, with the brightest areas of greatest reflection being called the highlights. The areas where the light was partially absorbed or where light didn't reach at all are called the midtones and shadows. But light's not that simple. It's always bouncing around and bouncing off objects and from objects to surfaces and surfaces back to objects and objects to surfaces to our eye. And this is what gives us reflections and all the other perceived sources of light. So to get started here, I'm just going to lay down a bit of a titanium white with a little droppy of the retarder and mix those up together. Real nice. Pop up a little picture of our pearl. I already have some tone down from my paint at the end of the last session, but it's not right values, so I'm just going to put down a bit of white with the palette knife here, and I can then just mix that on with my edger brush and a bit of water right onto the paper there. You can do your mixing straight on like this as long as your surface underneath is already dry, and it can either help to lighten up or darken, create a little bit more atmosphere than our image has. When starting out a painting, it's always important to begin with the background. This will make sure that any objects placed into the painting will sit on top of the background and not have any uncomfortable sharp edges. I can be a bit of a nervous Nancy when it comes to wasting paint. Sometimes I just like to get every last bit, so just taking a little bit off the palette knife rather than just wiping it straight onto the cloth and adding it into my background. I've put down my ivory black with a touch of the retarder and am mixing it up. Always make sure that your palette knife is completely clean of any other value when you're mixing black and white, or they will get gray. I'm just putting a touch of the black up in my background, blend that in to darken up the space a bit, just showing you how you can change your values very simply right on the paper. Or you can mix your tone on the palette with your brush and add it right in that way too. Now I'm just lightening up my background a bit. Remember that you can always make adjustments later on, so if it's not perfect, don't worry. Just try to get it as close as you can. Now I'm going to take my small liner brush and just do some quick measurements to place the pearl. And I'm just eyeballing about where I see the top, the bottom, and the left side and right side. Then all we need to do is connect the dots, imagining a circle and connecting the 4 points. And with this I'm just using titanium white because I'm thinking of this as my measurement. I can always change the tones and value later. Every now and then put down a few squirts of water on your paint to keep it from drying out. So once you have your pearl measured and placed, you can get down to the lower section background, or the flat surface that the pearl is sitting on. And I'm going to start out with the very backmost point first and just pull down the paint using my edger brush, which is a really great tool that has the ability to put down a big stroke of paint while also getting tight into the nooks and crannies. Be sure to always check your values after each step, and if you think you're not right, just go back and fix them. So I'm looking and seeing that my surface is a bit too dark and I want to lighten it up. Put down a little more white, a little too light, bring it back a little darker with the black. Now, in between each step, be sure to clean your brush. Don't let the paint dry on your brush or it can be
a disaster.
I like to wash it and then pull out all the paint while holding on to the ferrule. Another thing you don't ever want to do is leave your brushes sitting in the water, as that will cause irreversible damage. The next step that I want to do here is to start putting in that shadow underneath my pearl, start to give it a little bit of weight and volume. This wee bit of shadow is going to start to make it pop. Now I'm using one of the other brushes just as a rest for my hand, in case there are any wet areas still on the bottom of the painting that I don't want to get onto my hand, a smudge. And just take a little bit of the white, start to think about how that reflection works below the pearl. If you're ever unsure of your values, simply take your scale that you've created or a reference scale and compare it against what you're looking at. So if we take our image, I can go one by one and figure out what each value is going to be in approximate. So I'm just finishing up the cast shadow here, blending out the edges so that they disappear into the surface, and then I will start to work on the reflection underneath. Now with reflections, you just want to get kind of the essence or general shape of the object. Start a lot lighter than you think you need to, and then with the dry brush just go in and blend it out so it disappears with just a hint left. And as you're dry brushing out, you may see that some of your shadows will be lightened. Just go in and touch them up a bit, make sure that the values are back to where they should be. And now we begin on our precious pearl. Start by setting in an approximate value. You don't have to be too particular here. my main concern is getting that right edge where the pearl meets the cast shadow perfect. It was a bit wonky before, and I'm just cleaning that edge up so I can then move on to blending out its shape. And if you ever need to touch up the background right next to your object, just be careful and put a small amount down at a time, and then with a dry, clean brush, you can blend those in so it's almost like it's not there. Work slow at building up your values. It's much easier to add and adjust in little increments and make changes that way rather than making big leaps one direction or another and having to go back and fix them later on. So put down a little bit, check and make sure it looks right, clean off your brush and blend it in. As we are describing our object, you want to use the paintbrush as if you are tracing over the real object. So as you can see with the sphere, we want to always be using a circular motion with our blending, pulling up or pushing down. Try to keep sharp 90-degree angle movements out of this part completely. At this point in the painting, essentially all that's left is to keep pulling out the remaining highlights until you are matched up with your values. And once it looks right, go back, check each area to ensure your values are correct. Make sure you haven't missed out any last reflections, and that's it. I think you get the idea. If you have any questions about any of the techniques or need something explained more thoroughly, simply leave me a comment or shoot me a note, and I would be delighted to help you. So, get to it.
And have fun doing it. Goodbye.